During the Cold War, tens of thousands of American soldiers became living test subjects in secret experiments involving powerful psychotropic drugs, LSD, amphetamines, and new, little-known substances were administered both voluntarily and forcibly, hoping to create an army of superhumans immune to fear, pain, and fatigue. Imagine the scale. Thousands of lives broken and burned not only on the battlefield, but in secret CIA labs and military bases. These substances were meant to change a person, to turn them into a war machine. But what really happened to these soldiers? Did they truly become super soldiers? Or was the cost too high? Now we dive into a chilling world where science became a weapon and state ambitions overshadowed human dignity. The CIA's secret programs aim to create the perfect fighter, fearless, fast, invulnerable, ready to destroy the enemy at any cost. But at what price? The answer will shock even the most skeptical viewers. This is a story about how the race for military superiority turned into a horrific experiment on human souls. Stay with us to uncover the truth about the drugs that created super soldiers and destroyed their lives. The Cold War was not just a period of tension between two superpowers. It was a true arms race, a battle for influence and control over the world. The United States and the Soviet Union stood on the brink of open conflict, each striving for an advantage that could change the course of history. Fear of nuclear catastrophe and the uncertainty of the future penetrated every corner of society. In this atmosphere of panic and uncertainty, the idea of creating super soldiers emerged, fighters who would not fear, tire, or break under the pressure of war. The American military leadership and the CIA began searching for any means to gain an edge over the Soviet Union, even if those methods were shocking and dangerous. This tension, this constant readiness for war, made people in the US and around the world witnesses to an era where morals and ethics were sidelined. What was needed was power, power that could endure any trial. And this is how experiments began that would change the fates of thousands of soldiers forever. During this period, the CIA and US military units began actively seeking unconventional methods to enhance their soldiers' combat capabilities. The idea was to create a soldier who could maintain extraordinary focus, endurance, and aggression even in the most extreme combat conditions. To achieve this, they turned to psychotropic substances, chemicals capable of radically altering human consciousness and behavior. LSD, discovered in 1938, gained special attention from CIA agents who believed the drug could be used both as a weapon and a mind control tool. Secret studies began under code names, the most famous being the MK-Ultra program. MK-Ultra involved the use of LSD and other psychotropic drugs in various conditions, from controlling enemy minds to boosting the combat readiness of American soldiers. Amphetamines were also crucial, stimulants that help fight fatigue, increase alertness, and aggression. These drugs had already been used in World War II, but during the Cold War, their use expanded with new scale and methodology. The military began experimenting not only with dosages, but also with combining different drugs for maximum effect. Many experiments were conducted in secrecy. Volunteers included both military personnel and civilians, often unaware of what they were taking. Forced drug administration was also common. The number of test subjects grew as the program expanded to include special forces, intelligence units, and elite fighters. Secrecy and lack of transparency allowed the CIA and military to avoid responsibility for the consequences. The soldiers themselves were often forgotten when the drug's effects manifested as mental disorders and personality breakdowns. Thus began an era of experiments on human consciousness, a ruthless race for power and control at a cost many could not pay. By the mid-1950s, the CIA officially launched several secret programs aimed not just at studying psychotropic substances, but at radically using them to create super soldiers. The most famous of these initiatives was the MKUltra program, a massive project covering mind control, consciousness manipulation, and psychological pressure techniques. At the same time, a lesser-known but equally important program, Project MK Delta, focused on applying similar technologies in military operations abroad. The CIA played a key role in these programs, funding and coordinating experiments involving military labs, medical researchers, and psychologists. Laboratories disguised as ordinary scientific institutions became places of ruthless experiments, where volunteers and often unsuspecting subjects underwent unprecedented testing methods. The promises and expectations were grand. The U.S. military leadership hoped to create fearless soldiers with enhanced stress resistance, increased aggression, and superhuman endurance. It was believed that such warriors would shift the balance of power in the Cold War, giving the United States an edge over the Soviet Union. However, reality was far from as bright as the promises. The implementation of these programs involved incredibly brutal and highly risky methods. Subjects were often administered drugs, not only voluntarily, but also by force, through injections or even IV drips, sometimes without their consent or knowledge of the true composition. This was accompanied by a series of psychological tests and manipulations that crossed the boundaries of morality and humanity. Special attention was given to stimulating aggressive behavior through complex psycho-trainings, combining drugs with extreme stress situations and even torture. Experimenters tried to alter deep psychological responses. The military sought to turn soldiers into battle machines, fearless, extremely resilient, and absolutely obedient to orders. It was believed that enhancing aggression would reduce hesitation and fear, which often led to battlefield losses. One of the most horrific aspects was the combination of psychotropic substances with psychological pressure. From isolation and sensory deprivation to forced sleep and violent memory manipulation, this aimed to strengthen control over consciousness, forcing subjects to respond only to commands, almost deprived of free will. Military laboratories and research centers where these experiments took place were equipped with the latest technology and heavily guarded. Secret archives contain numerous schemes of drug administration, dosage schedules, and reactions, as well as photos and videos from experimental rooms where subjects endured horrific trials. These footage preserved in secret archives remind us that behind the walls of the civilized world, a real battle was fought, not on battlefields, but in laboratories, where human lives and psyches became a field for the cruelest experiments. It is important to understand that many participants in these programs were not volunteers. In the usual sense, they were often forced, intimidated, or deceived. These horrific practices left not only physical, but deep psychological scars, broken fates, shattered lives, and generations struggling with consequences years after the experiments ended. This chapter of history is a reminder of how far humanity can go in pursuit of military advantage, forgetting morality and humanity. After decades of secrecy, testimonies finally began to emerge from those who survived these brutal experiments. One veteran, whom we'll call John, went through the MKUltra program in the mid-1960s. He was given multiple types of psychotropic drugs simultaneously, subjected to prolonged psychological stress tests and isolation. After leaving the program, John suffered from severe panic attacks, memory blackouts, and his psyche felt torn apart. In his memoirs, he confessed, "I no longer knew where I ended and where this nightmare they forced on me began." Another story is Michael's, part of Project MK Delta, where experiments took place in field conditions. After operations involving stimulants and LSD, he began experiencing hallucinations and often lost control of himself. His colleagues described how he changed day by day, From a resilient soldier to a walking ghost. Michael wrote in his diary, "This is not life. This is survival in a hell they made for me." Unfortunately, such stories are not isolated. A huge number of soldiers involved in these programs faced acute forms of PTSD, depression, paranoia, and even schizophrenia. Many were left without help after service. Their psychological wounds were ignored, and the U.S. medical system long refused to acknowledge the link between the experiments and their illnesses. In declassified documents released decades later, there are quotes from victims. "They turned me into a weapon but forgot to give me back my humanity. I lost myself in the fog of pills and orders. My mind is a battlefield where I lost." These words resonate as a tragedy that must never be forgotten. Despair and hopelessness were constant companions of these veterans. They went through hell to serve their country, but the country often turned away, fearing exposure and truth. Their bodies remained in service, but their souls were lost in labyrinths of despair. These stories are not only proof of human cruelty, but a warning never to sacrifice lives for the illusion of power. The consequences of experiments with psychotropic drugs became a tragedy of massive proportions. A huge number of veterans involved in these programs became victims of severe mental disorders, from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, to severe forms of schizophrenia and psychosis. Official data show that the PTSD rate among participants and veterans of these secret projects was several times higher than that of regular military personnel, indicating the profound impact of the experiments on their psyche. Suicides became an epidemic among the affected. According to various estimates, in the U.S. alone, hundreds, if not thousands, of former program participants took their own lives, unable to bear the psychological pressure and inner torment. Veterans' families often broke apart due to the inability to cope with the aftermath of trauma, and many men and women fell into complete social isolation, losing contact with society and loved ones. All these people who risked their lives for their country were mostly forgotten by the state. Psychological help was provided to only a few, and most veterans had to fight their demons alone. Official documents concealed the scale of the tragedy for a long time, and information about the real condition of the victims remained secret for decades. Social stigma, silence, and misunderstanding made the veterans' pain even sharper. Their struggle is not only a story about experiments, but also about betrayal and indifference from those to whom they dedicated their lives. This topic remains painful today, reminding us of the price people pay in the pursuit of military advantage. Among the thousands of veterans who survived the horrific psychotropic drug experiments, there are those who became true symbols of government betrayal and neglect. One such person is Jonathan Mitchell, a former Special Forces soldier who lost his family, job, and sense of self after participating in the secret MKUltra program. His story is a brutal example of how the state abandoned its heroes to their fate. Jonathan began experiencing severe psychotic episodes during the experiments, but instead of help, he was met with silence and neglect. Over time, his condition worsened. He lost control over his emotions, became aggressive, and withdrawn. His family, unable to cope with the pressure, left him. Without social support and proper medical care, Jonathan ended up homeless, forgotten by society. A similar fate befell Maria Cartwright, a nurse who volunteered for military experiments. She suffers from severe PTSD and schizophrenia, yet government support never came. Her story became known only through activists' efforts to uncover secret archives. Photos of Maria taken at a veterans shelter show a woman who once saved soldiers' lives, now desperately needing rescue herself. These cases are just the tip of the iceberg. Government silence and systematic cover-ups became the norm. Archival documents exposing the scale of experiments remained classified for decades. The true number of victims and losses will likely never be known. And while the authorities remain silent, these veterans remain forgotten heroes, their lives destroyed in the name of secret ambitions and the greed for power. For decades, the CIA and top government officials used various methods to hide the terrible consequences of their experiments on soldiers. Documents exposing these crimes were systematically destroyed. In 1973, Nixon's administration ordered the destruction of most files related to MKUltra, erasing secret evidence. Instead of telling the truth, the government chose censorship and disinformation under the cover of national security. The press and public received confusing statements designed to distract from the real facts. Whistleblowers and affected veterans faced harassment, lawsuits, and attempts to discredit their stories. This cover-up caused deep harm not only to veterans, but also to their families and society. Without official help, many victims suffered alone, isolated in their struggle with trauma's aftermath. Families bore stigma and misunderstanding, unable to speak openly about the secret experiments. This massive lie damaged the moral authority of the state, showing how far power can go, even at the cost of its own people. Only decades later did the truth begin to emerge, leaving behind hundreds of broken lives and a harsh lesson for all. Today, despite the closure of most high-profile past programs, research into psychotropic substances and technologies for soldiers continues. Secret laboratories and research centers keep searching for new ways to enhance soldiers' combat effectiveness. Now, the scene includes not only classic stimulants, but also modern nootropics, biohacking, neurointerfaces, and other technologies. These tools allow even more precise influence on the human brain and body. The drive for military advantage never fades. It has become part of national security strategy and global competition. Interest is growing in genetic modifications and artificial intelligence combined with biotechnology. This opens new horizons in creating the soldier of the future. However, these cutting-edge methods spark sharp ethical debates about the limits of human dignity and the right to life. It is important to note that such experiments are not limited to the USA. Other countries, including Russia, actively develop and use drugs to boost their soldiers' combat potential. There is evidence that in the current conflict in Ukraine, Russian soldiers are often forcibly given drugs that increase aggression and endurance. But these substances also destroy their mental health. This creates not only short-term advantages, but also long-lasting effects that will stay with these people for life. Thus, the history of experiments with super soldiers continues today, taking new forms and scales. It repeats old mistakes under the new guise of technological progress. In modern military conflicts, especially the war in Ukraine, troubling signs have emerged of the use of narcotic and psychotropic substances to boost soldiers' combat potential. According to numerous reports and intelligence, Russia actively practices forced or encouraged use of stimulants like methamphetamines and other synthetic drugs among its troops and militants. The goal is to create soldiers who feel no pain, fatigue, or fear, capable of sustained combat operations without breaks. However, this superpower comes at a terrible cost. Soldiers' mental and physical health deteriorate, leading to addiction, uncontrollable aggression, and sometimes complete mental breakdown. This approach resembles Cold War-era experiments when the USA and the CIA sought to create perfect warriors using psychotropic drugs. But now the use of such substances is more widespread and crude, often beyond control and with total disregard for the soldiers' welfare. The difference today is that the production and distribution technologies of these drugs are much more accessible. Information warfare and disinformation make it harder to recognize the true scale of the problem. Using drugs in modern war is not just a strategy to increase combat readiness, but a new tool of psychological pressure. It intensifies the tragedy of war at the level of both individuals and society. Thus, despite all technological changes, the key lessons of the past remain relevant. The race for advantage through artificial human enhancement always has destructive consequences. These consequences go far beyond the battlefield. The race for military power often walks a fine line between the desire for victory and preserving humanity. The use of narcotic and psychotropic substances, even with the best intentions, challenges fundamental values, respect for human dignity, and every soldier's right to a healthy life. When a state forces or pressures warriors to take mind-altering substances, it creates immense psychological strain not only on them, but also on their families and society as a whole. Soldiers become both instruments and victims of a system that often ignores the consequences for their mental health. Soldiers' rights are not just legal terms, but core moral values that cannot be sacrificed for efficiency. Ignoring this leads to lifelong trauma for veterans and creates deep social and ethical issues society will struggle to resolve. Thus, the ethical boundary is not just a moral question. It is a guarantee that war will not become a catastrophe for those who fight it and for all humanity. Broken lives, shattered destinies. These are not just numbers in archives. These are real people who became victims of ambition and a ruthless race for power. Today, we stand on the brink of new technologies and experiments. But is it worth repeating the mistakes of the past? The question remains, are we willing to sacrifice human dignity again for the illusion of invincibility? Will we learn from history, or are we doomed to repeat this tragic cycle? The choice is ours, and the consequences are real. We must decide: preserve humanity or lose it to the hunger for power. Now is the time to stand firm and say never again. Because if we fail, we condemn countless more to lives broken and dreams destroyed. The future is watching. What will we choose?